welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I'm Rye and this is Rye's Reading Corner, and today I'm going to be doing my February wrap up. So February went by super fast. I cannot believe that we are already on to March, but I figured I would start this video off just with a couple stats on how my reading went for February, and I'm very happy with how much I read in this past month. I read a total of 11 books, and I read a total of 4,888 pages. So that's more pages than I read in January, even though I read 12 books that month. I read quite a few chunky books in February. Also, I'm using my nice bullet journal to kind of go over all my stats. I read 10 physical books and I read one audiobook, which is not typical for me. I do not care much for audios. I read 3 fantasy books, 3 thrillers, 3 romances, 1 dystopian novel, and 1 science fiction. I had a total of 6 5-star books this month, which was amazing. I read 3 4-star reads. I read 2 3-star reads. I read no 2 or 1-star reads, and I had 1 DNF. So overall, February was a great reading month for me. So I'm going to go in order of my lowest rated books to my highest rated book. So we'll first just start quickly with the book that I did DNF, and that is The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This is a thriller novel. This is not necessarily a permanent DNF for me, but I DNF'd it at the moment because it wasn't the type of thriller that I was looking for. You pretty much know off the first chapter that the character is completely unreliable, and I don't like knowing that. I like thinking that maybe the character is super reliable, and then all of a sudden there being a twist at some point in the book where you're like, oh my gosh, the character is unreliable. What's true, what's not for what's happened so far? And you know that this character is unreliable from the very first part of the book. I just wasn't crazy for me because I read other thrillers this month that were just top notch for me, and this just wasn't doing it. So currently this is a DNF, but let me know down in the comments below if you think this should be a permanent DNF or you think if I should get it a second try. Move on to my 2 3-star reads that I had. I'm not going to go too much into one of these because I do have a whole reading vlog about one of these books that is in the section. I'll put it in the cards above, and it is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is a debut novel. It was a book of the month book. This is about a girl who is very type A, and she's celebrating that she got her doctorate, and she goes to Las Vegas with her 2 best friends, and while she is in Las Vegas, she wakes up and she finds out she has gotten married. And the girl that she has been married to does a note, kind of even if she wants to kind of get in touch with her. So she has to go back and kind of work through things out because she thought she had her whole life planned out. Type A personality, and now she is married and she wants to try and figure out if she can make this work with this girl across the country. So definitely, it's a sapphic romance. The friendships in here were really fun. I loved the rep of mental health was really prominent, so I like that there was mental health in this book. Also, I did like certain parts of it. However, there were some disadvantages, things I just did not care for in this book. I think it was weird reaction to me of finding out that you're married. I thought the reaction was kind of weird. It just kind of fell flat for me. So I gave it a 3 stars. It wasn't the worst book I've read. It's not the best thing I've read, but it wasn't terrible. So that was my first 3-star read. My next 3-star read was a buddy read that I did with some amazing people, and it is Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. So this is my second book by these authors. My first one I read was In a Holidays. That was a 5-star read for me. So I had some really high hopes going into this book, and it just fell kind of flat for me. This story takes place around a wedding. At the beginning of the story, our main character, Olivia, Olivia's sister is getting married, and which is actually her twin. And we have her husband's brother, his name I think is Ethan, and they don't like each other, but they've had to kind of work together to kind of help with the wedding. But at the wedding, everyone gets food poisoning besides Ethan and Olivia, and so they end up taking the honeymoon because it's already paid for, a full expense trip. The sister's really into winning free things. So this is kind of a hate to love romance, but I did have some issues with this. I felt like the hate part of it was not really developed well enough. And I get that they didn't care for each other, but to me, for a hate-love relationship, I want some real hate coming through, and I just didn't get that in this one. There's constant references to her sexualized body, and they keep drawing on that, and I just think it was super overkill. There are some parts that I thought was cute and was funny, and it was a fine romance. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it just wasn't as good as some of the other romances that I have read. So for me, that's why it kind of fell in that 3-star category. All right, so now we're gonna move on to my 4-star reads of the month, and the first one is Gemini, by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the sequel to Illuminae. So this is science fiction, and science fiction is not something that I generally read, but I do enjoy this series. So this takes place on like a space type station, or they I can see, this is why I'm not so familiar with science fiction. I just don't even really know the terminology. And like a community that lives up in the atmosphere, up in space, and they are attacked, this spaceship type thing, by biotech, and they're pretty much like terrorists. And our two main characters, we have Hannah, who is the captain's daughter, and then we have Nick, who is the son of one of like a drug cartel gang family that is lives on this space station as well, and they have to work together to defeat the terrorists, as well as like these alien type things that are on the spaceship and killing off people. I did enjoy this story. I love when you have two opposite characters' backgrounds kind of come together. I really, really enjoyed that. There was a little bit of a twist in here that I did not expect and not see coming. It is, if you're not familiar with this series, it's completely multimedia. It is a chunky book, but it reads super fast, but it is really cool. It's like messages, emails, pictures, graphics, everything you can imagine is how this story is told. I also did like that there were characters from the first story from Illuminae into also incorporated in this one as well. I did only give it 4 stars. There are parts that I found a little slow compared to Illuminae, but I still thought it was great, and it's definitely a series that I would like to finish this year. All right, the next one I have is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. So this is a fantasy story that was released in 2020. It's a story that I wanted to get to in 2020, just didn't get the chance to. It is about our young male, and he lives in this community where they have special powers, and when you turn a certain age, you have like this, get like magical powers kind of, and you like do stuff with like the dead. I'm explaining this so bad, I apologize. But our main character has not been able to have that ceremony because in his community he is not seen as a male because he is transgender. So he wants to prove to everyone that he is truly a male, and he performs the ceremony on his own, and he does get the powers from the goddess, and he resurrects a boy who ended up actually going to his school, not on purpose, and now it's trying to kind of like a mystery, trying to figure out who killed him and trying to save his body. And it's just really, really cool. It's a fantasy story set in a realistic world. It has a lot of like talks about like Day of the Dead, which I find really, really interesting. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. I think what made it 4 stars with me is that at the beginning I found it a little slow at parts. It took me a little while to get into it. But as it got, I would say maybe like before halfway, I really fell in love with it and really, really enjoyed it. But it is a quick fantasy read, and if you don't love heavy fantasy, I would highly recommend this book. Next 4-star read, it was a disappointing read actually, and after I thought about it, it's a very, very low 4-star. Really probably should be more of like a 3.5. This was on my most anticipated reads. I really thought it was gonna be a 5-star read. It has things that I love, and it just fell so short for me, and that is The Project by Courtney Summers. And I feel so bad saying this. I know a lot of my friends have this on their TBR for this month, but this was a letdown for me. So this is a cult story told kind of through 2 perspectives, the present and the past. There is a tragic accident that happens, and it leaves our main character Lo on the brink of death, and her sister B is kind of trying to find kind of solace or condolence, like to try and find where all this is going on. Like she's a young, she's a teenager, like how to kind of cope and deal with this. And so she comes in touch with a cult, and the cult kind of takes her in. And when they are older, Lo was trying to find her sister and to get her hopefully out of the cult. So the story mostly takes place about her trying to find her sister. This, to me, like I said, fell really short. There were parts that I really enjoyed. Like, I like the parts about the cult, but I was looking for more cult-like things in this story, and it really lacked in that aspect for me. The characters kind of fell flat. I really was not connected to any of the characters, and I found this story pretty predictable, which is a bummer. It's labeled as a thriller on Goodreads, and this is not really thriller-esque to me at all. It's more of a mystery, and it's kind of weak in that department as well. Also, what really bugged me is that they describe as upstate New York as part of where this takes place, and being from that area, like, that's not upstate New York, and that just really, really aggravated me. But like I said, I feel like I'm really hating on this book, and I still give it 4 stars, but there are some things that weren't bad. I think the writing itself is really well done. It wasn't what I expected. My hopes were like set way higher, and I just fell flat, and I really probably more of a 3.5 star read. Okay, let's get into my 5-star reads. I honestly don't even know which one is my favorite from this month, but at first, let's start off with a reread I did, and I did it as an audio, and pretty much audio is the only way that I can do rereads, and it is The Program by Suzanne Young, who is my favorite author. I try and talk about this series as much as I can. It takes place in a society where in the world suicide in teens has become an epidemic, and they believe that you can even like catch it from other people, like it's like a transferable disease. And they have created something called The Program, where it pretty much erases anything that's been bad in your life, and just kind of like reset you over so that you don't commit suicide. So our 2 main characters are trying to struggle with this. They're on the brink of almost that age where you have a choice if you go to the program or not. And they're seeing their friends being taken away or killing themselves. And they eventually do get put into the program, and they are trying to find themselves through all of this and trying to come back to some kind of normal after all this. And it's also a love story type thing in it as well. But it is just really interesting on this commentary of this issue that we obviously have in our society, and it's interesting to see like a real issue put in like a science fiction dystopian type situation. But it is one of my favorite series. The audiobook is not that great, so if you're going to read it for the first time, I would definitely suggest doing a physical read, but as a reread, it was just nice to have in the background, and I fell in love with it again and again. 5-star read for me. All right, my next 5-star read is The X Talks by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This was a anticipated release for me. I read Rachel Lynn Solomon's Today, Tonight, and Tomorrow, which is a YA romance. Really enjoyed it. So we have our 2 main characters. We have Shay and Dominic, and they work at like a podcast radio type show thing, and they come up with this idea to have a talk show, having exes on there and talking about kind of how it is to be exes and what went wrong in their relationship. And they are enemies, and so their producer thinks that they don't like each other. They've actually never dated, but their producer thinks because they don't like each other that they'd be perfect candidates to host for the talk show. So obviously, since it is a romance, it is a hate to love romance story. I liked it because I felt like I could relate to our main character. She is like the same age as me. I thought she was very relatable in many ways, and I like romances where they are relatable, like main characters. I liked the banter, and I thought it was really unique. I haven't really read a story that takes place like a romance that takes place at a radio show. Like, I know there's a lot of workplace romances where it's more like an office setting. So that was really different for me, and I enjoyed this one. And I read this for the Sugar and Spice Book Club, which is hosted by Amanda from Ginger Snapped Reads and Kirsten from Kirsten's Corner. And I will link their channels below. The live show for that is happening on March 6th on Kirsten's channel, I believe. All right, my next 5-star read is The One by John Mars. This is a thriller. This was so good. I feel like a lot of people have been talking about this book, and I was personally recommended to me by Kirsten from Kirsten's Corner. This takes place in a futuristic society where you can simply take a test and you are matched with your soulmate through your DNA. So we still have people in this society though that are being like they're just falling in love like naturally. So this has now broken up a lot of marriages and has caused a lot of issues, as you can only imagine. So we follow, I want to say it's 5 perspectives or 5 different stories within like the whole thing that have different experiences with the like this matching DNA program. It does not get confusing, even though there are following different stories. It does not, which is nice. The chapters are super short, so this reads so fast. There were so many twists and turns, and did not expect things to like turn out the way they did. And I was so excited. Every time I would end a character's story, I would be so heartbroken because I wanted to finish and see what would happen. But yeah, definitely a great thriller. I would highly, highly recommend The One by John Mars. So my next 5-star read was a fantasy book. It was actually the first one I read this month or in February, and that is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Almentrout. So this is a honky, chunky thriller fantasy story, and it is about Poppy, who is a maiden, and she has to live her life as pretty much in solitary. She cannot be seen really. She can only talk to certain people. She cannot really be friends with anybody. And of course she does not like that, and I loved that about her. She's a very badass character who challenges societal norms, which I love in a book. And she has to be guarded at all times. She is in need of a new guard at one point, and we have Hawk, who comes in, and he is a very attractive young male who is really young in the terms of who could be guards, but he has proven himself as a great fighter, and he comes to be her guard. And this is kind of a little bit of a forbidden romance. It's also some like supernatural romance on top of that fantasy as well. This story had twists and turns that I did not expect for a fantasy story. I really, really enjoyed it. Again, even though it's such a big book, it is a quick read, and I feel like if you are a fan of Sarah J. Maas, you would enjoy From Blood and Ash, and that's kind of what has guided me to read this book. And I'm hoping I have the second one on my TBR for March, because the 3rd book comes out in April. All right, so my next 5-star read, speaking of Sarah J. Maas, was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I'm not going to say too much about this because I have a whole book review type video that I made for this particular book. I'll post it in the cards above. This story follows different characters than the rest of the ACOTAR series. This follows Nesta and Cassian. Nesta is Farah's sister, and Cassian was one of just people living with Rysand. And this story is so good. It's really character driven in the beginning, which is a little bit different than some of the other stories, which I appreciate and I really liked. Nesta as a character as a whole, her development in the story is so good. And I think what I love about Sarah J. Maas is that she makes characters that are set in a fantasy world realistic and relatable. Definitely trigger warnings though. Definitely look those up. Check them out in my video. I do mention some of them, but this is all I'm going to say because I literally have a whole video dedicated to this book. My last book of the month that was a 5-star read was actually a book that I read in several hours because it was that good. And it was A Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is my second Riley Sager book, and again, another 5-star read. We have our main character, I'm trying to remember her name because it was read a long time ago, Jules, and she's really down on her luck. Things are just not going away with the way that she wants them to, and she's really in the need of some money, and she finds this job. It looks ideal. It's an apartment sitter at this apartment place that is like regal, like top notch, like really like sometimes famous people live there. But there's a lot of rules and things are very odd that she has to follow. And there are some weird, suspicious things that are happening in this apartment complex type area and down in, I think it's New York City. The ending in this book was probably the best ending I have ever read in a thriller. I was so taken aback and surprised that I did not see it coming. And as an avid thriller reader, a lot of times I feel like you can figure out the endings very easily. I had no idea that this was how this story was going to read. It just blew my mind. Like, I'm still thinking about it. I tell everyone that they need to read this. I'm telling every one of you who's watching, you need to read this book, even if you're not a huge thriller fan. I think you'll like it. It's a quick read, and it just was phenomenal. So Riley Sager for the win once again. So these are all the books that I read this month. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite book was this month and or your least favorite book of this month was. If you've read any of these books before, let me know what your thoughts and opinions were on them. So if you'd like to take this journey with me, please press that subscribe button. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you never want to miss any of the content that I post, make sure you press that notification button. If you want to be my friend on any other social media platforms, all that information is linked down in the description box below. And yeah, stay kind, loves, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Pretty up from the minute that I met you.